Hey, welcome everybody. Good morning. Thank you all for your wonderful chanting voices. Benji, thank you so much for being our Doan this morning. And thanks everybody online that's joining us. It's good to see some familiar faces. Yeah. All right. This morning, I'd like to continue to talk about the Tenzo Kyokun, the instructions to the cook, because it's just so practical and it really provides us a way to think about how to connect our Zen practice with ordinary everyday life and activities that we're doing regularly. So if you're in the kitchen, like most people, we're lucky enough to be in the kitchen 3 meals a day, then there are lots of opportunities for Zen practice. And this kind of breaks us out of the mentality where we associate Zen solely with meditation. And of course, meditation is just so important. It's been a savior of my own life in many different ways, but we need to know how to practice outside or off of the cushion in a way that makes sense for our life as well as for our family if we're with our families in some way. And oftentimes our family is not practicing Zen, but still we can learn, I think, from the Tenzo Kyokun about how to practice in such a way that brings some harmony to our family, even if our whole family is not on board with Zen. So I'd like to offer the title of this talk is Collaborate and Plan Ahead. Collaborate and plan ahead. And Dogen, right at the beginning, or close to the beginning of, one of the patterns of Dogen's writing is that he'll say something fairly esoteric. And in the case of the Tenzo Kyokun, he begins with an esoteric statement that you're wondering, like, what's he saying? Where's he coming from? And then he gives some practical instructions. And then he follows up with some stories that he, in the case of the Tenzo Kyokun, stories that he personally encountered when he was in China. So this is the section I'm going to read from is the practical instruction. In previous Dharma talks on the Tenzo Kyokun, I offered some stories that Dogen gives and just elaborated a little bit more on those. This time what I'm going to do is start with one of the instructions that he gives, one of the first instructions that he gives for the 10th, very practical instruction. And then I'll follow up with a couple of stories that I heard from my teacher, as well as from another source outside of the Buddhist world. So here we go. Dogen Zenji says, here's how to fulfill the job for a whole day and night. Again, what's the job we're talking about? We're talking about preparing a meal, right? Something that any one of us, whether he's obviously speaking to monks and nuns in his training temple, but all of us are in a position, most of us are in a position of making meals. Here's how to fulfill the job for a whole day and night. First, after lunch, consult with the director in their offices to get the provisions for the next day's breakfast. And lunch. Thereafter, all the temple administrators gather in their offices and discuss what combinations of flavors, which vegetables, and what breakfast gruel to prepare the next day. All right, so there's a lot packed in here. It might seem really straightforward, and it is, but I want to go into it a little bit more and think about how it might be beneficial for us to consider this one particular instruction. It seems very dry, right? Basically, you're consulting with other people. So first of all, let me give you a brief historical note about meals. and mealtime in the Buddhist world, particularly with regards to monks and nuns. In the Buddha's time, maybe some of you know this already, but in the Buddha's time, they were only permitted one meal per day, and usually that was the meal that was taken before noon. The reason for that one meal a day is because they didn't want to tax the lay people in the communities that they went into or bother them for more than that. Also, they were forbidden in India from handling food or even cultivating the ground. So they persisted on one meal a day, if you can imagine. And I have not had that experience, other than brief times of fasting, maybe for a day or so. I've not had the experience of living off of one meal a day. So I'm foreign to that practice. And when Buddhism went into China, and I mentioned this a little bit more last talk, the practice had to change. And one of the things that changed is that the monks and the nuns, they started to cultivate the land, they started cooking, and then the kitchen became incorporated into their practice. Also, 2 meals started taking place. And the first meal of the day, the breakfast meal, was considered a minor meal, and then the big meal of the day was at noon or just before noon. And over the centuries, since Dogen was in Japan in the 13th century, over the centuries, the training temples began to incorporate a dinner meal as well. And today it's considered a quote-unquote non-meal. So people will eat, but it's not considered a meal. So and it's a way of honoring the tradition, remembering the tradition that the monks and nuns didn't eat 3 meals a day. They would end at the noon meal. And the dinner meal actually is called yakuseki. Yaku means medicine, and seki means stone. And it is a reference to what the Buddhist monks used to do in India, where they would take a stone and place it at their belly. And I think it may have been warmed in some way. They would place that stone at their belly to stave off hunger pains. So it's called yakuseki. But all the places that I trained in Japan today, as well as in the United States, have 3 meals. So anyways, that's just a historical note on where this is coming from, and talking about after the lunch meal, then prepare the next day's things. Okay. So this word consult is so important. I want to kind of dive into consult. So it says, after lunch, consult with the director in their offices to get the provisions. All right. Consulting is what the world needs now more than ever. We need people who know how to consult with other people and how to collaborate with them, regardless of whether you agree or disagree with those people. And this is kind of flies in the face, this idea of consulting with others for what you're going to plan in the next day. Kind of flies in the face of kind of the staunch American individualism, and also the misconceptions that people sometimes bring. I'm not saying you bring, but sometimes people bring to Zen practice, where we might think this practice is something to be done all by myself, and I don't need anybody to consult with, and if I do, it's a sign of weakness to consult with somebody else, or to get somebody else's opinion about what I should do or how I should do it. But this can't be further from the truth. So you can see right here, it's baked into our practice to consult with people that have more experience than you. And in this case, Dogen's talking about cooking, but that's also the case for Zen practice in general, the importance of consulting with others to get feedback on your practice. My teacher had now here's the thing with consulting, it requires a certain level of trust to ask somebody else's opinion, and especially in a religious or a spiritual context. My teacher really struggled when she was at the women's monastery. From some of her stories, especially in the earlier years, she lived at the women's temple for 8 years, and she really struggled there the first few years in her training, trying to understand how to live amongst other Buddhist practitioners. And what she noticed was that there were people there that weren't as sincere as she thought of herself in regards to her own practice. They didn't really want to practice, or it seemed to her mind, they weren't there to practice, they were there because they had to be there. And she did mention some of them had been orphaned, and they'd been kind of forced into a Buddhist lifestyle that they didn't necessarily want, which seems kind of strange for modern Westerners who embrace Buddhism and really want to do meditation. What she experienced, on the other hand, was that there were people there that didn't really want to do meditation, and they saw it as a burden. And if, say, one of the teachers wasn't present in meditation, she recalled a young nun wearing her headphones and listening to music during zazen. If you can imagine that. So every so often, I think it was maybe once a month or so, a teacher named Yogo Suigan Roshi would come to the Nisoto, the women's monastery, and he would come from Sojiji. So that's one of the twin head temples of Zen in Japan. There's two head temples, Eiheiji and Sojiji. So this was a Zen master coming from Sojiji to give a talk to the women's monastery and see how their practice was. And he'd come regularly, and the nuns would have an opportunity to ask the teacher a question, kind of a public dokusan, like we experienced with Teijo and Jikan's teacher a few months ago. And so my teacher asked Yogo Suigan Roshi a question. She asked him, "What is Sangha?" And she recalled, she said, she shared this story, but I also got to see the question being asked in a video recording of it. There was at one time a video recording of the Nisoto and their practice there, and it filmed this public dokusan. And so it was all in Japanese, of course, and my teacher was translating for us. So this is where I got the story from. So the teacher, she asked the teacher, "What is Sangha? What is Sangha?" And she was, of course, in the back of her mind, she was thinking of all of these people she was training with that she didn't feel were sincere enough in their practice. In other words, they weren't doing as good a job with their practice. They weren't getting into Zazen as much as she was, and they didn't really like meditation, right? So she's asking, "What is Sangha? I'm really struggling with this. What is Sangha?" And she didn't give any of that background to Yogo Suigan Roshi. She just asked the question, "What is Sangha?" And Suigan Roshi responds, "Sangha?" And she says, "Yes, Sangha, hai, Sangha." He says, "Get along with others." Right? Get along with others. In other words, he wasn't gonna tell her you gotta everybody should be their best and practice really hard and all of that. which she was kind of expecting. She may have also been expecting for him to really come down hard on nuns that weren't practicing hard enough. But rather, he pointed her back to herself. Get along with others, right? And I think that's the heart of our practice with Sangha, is getting along with others, rather than judging other people for how good or bad they are in practice. This is a really important point, is that we often, and you can notice it in yourself, oh, that guy, he doesn't know what he's doing, that person doesn't know what they're doing, this one's talking bad about that one, there's gossip going on in the Zendo or in the Sangha, and I don't like this, right? That's, you're going to experience that. You're going to experience that at Nebraska Zen Center. There's no hiding from the way people practice. And what happens inevitably is we're going to judge people. We're going to say this person's a good practitioner and that person's a bad practitioner. This one's really new, that one's really senior, and we make all these little judgments in our mind, thinking that they should be better. And it's not getting at the core of our practice. Our core is get along with the people that you're with. That doesn't mean you have to like them. It doesn't mean you have to agree with them. It's difficult. It's very difficult to collaborate with others and to agree with others. We need to learn how to compromise, for one thing, right? But sometimes we prefer to just destroy our opponent. And that's kind of the dualistic thinking that's so strong in our society right now. It's got to be this way or it's got to be that way, and there's no compromise whatsoever. But this Shingi is orienting us to not just get along with humankind, but to get along with other kinds as well. And actually, there's a story, well, that's not a story. Thich Nhat Hanh says, speaking of these polarities around collaboration and the difficulty around collaboration. And right now, beginning of October 2025, we see that in government shutdown, right? One side wants it one way, the other side wants it the other way, and there's not been any compromise there. Thich Nhat Hanh mentions, sometimes we want to get rid of one end, or an extreme point of view even. We want to get rid of an extreme point of view. So if you can imagine a stick, he says, I'm saying, imagine a stick, and one end of that stick you don't like. You don't like that end of the stick. So you want to get rid of that end of the stick. So what do? You take it and you break it off, but you still have the end of the stick. This is just shorter now. So the point being that you can't get rid of anything. In our attempts to try to get rid of views that differ from ours, perspectives that differ from ours, it's futile. There's always going to be, no matter how small we break off that stick, there's always going to be a left side and a right side to it. You keep breaking it, there's still going to be, there's no end to that. All right? So, in America, the Tenzo is largely in charge of planning the meals, and they work closely with other assistant Tenzos. In my case, when I worked as a Tenzo for Mount Equity Zendo, my teacher had me always consult with her about the menu that I was going to plan, especially for sesshin beforehand. And I remember fretting, sharing, this is the menu I've come up with. Because oftentimes she would say, this is going to work, but this isn't going to work. And you're not thinking about this person or that person. So I would have to go back to the drawing board and find other other recipes or different ways of using food or different ways of preparing food, thinking about quantities and all of that stuff. And you know, when I was in the middle of that kind of practice, it was really challenging for me because I was continually given feedback about my decisions. And this is the practice. This is the practice. Here, you know, lately I haven't had the real privilege of working like that with a teacher, where I have to present something and then they give me feedback or critique. But I do, and maybe you, I'm sure you guys do too, we're continually given feedback from other people, whether we deem them our teachers or not. Certainly at my workplaces, I'm given feedback from people that are more senior to me, and you guys, I'm sure you get feedback from your workplace at times, or if nothing else, you get feedback from your family. So how do we deal with feedback? This is a very difficult thing for a lot of us, dealing with when somebody is giving us some criticism about what decisions we're making. But this is par for the course for Zen practice, is the ability, and again, it's not easy, but the ability to receive feedback. But in general, in many Zen temples, especially smaller Zen temples like Nebraska Zen Center, in my case, I haven't really been given feedback, but we have to collaborate with others, and there's an assistant Tenzo, right? And so we are still collaborating. And thankfully, I've had prior experience working in the kitchen and getting that feedback. So I have kind of a sense. I'm not always hitting the mark just right, but I kind of have a sense of who's cooking the meal and what kind of things I want to incorporate into it. So the key for collaboration within the kitchen context is, one is the ability to receive feedback. The second one is to trust the person who's in charge, which again might be really challenging. And then the third thing is to work together as a team, right? So that there's a sense of group harmony. But this might be a formidable challenge for a lot of people that come to a Zen center, at least initially, especially if they don't have that strong sense of belonging, because a lot of people come to Zen centers feeling somewhat disenfranchised from religious communities, that they don't belong. And so it's important to have that sense of feeling grounded in yourself, that you belong outside of any belief systems, outside of differences of opinion. You belong not because of something that you've done, not because of something that you haven't done, but because you exist, right? Existence is the bedrock. The fact that you're here with us is that belonging. That's where belonging comes from. Not because you've agreed to do something, right? It comes from the very fact that you do this. The very fact that you're breathing. You belong. And if we really took that to heart, we wouldn't have any problem with receiving feedback. Feedback doesn't mean we're rejected, but it might feel that way. Sometimes it might feel that way. All right? And keep in mind that collaboration doesn't necessarily mean agreement, right? You don't necessarily have to agree with the person. So the emphasis in the Shingi, in this Tenzo Kyokun, the instructions to the cook, is on trusting who's in charge. 2 is listening to what needs to be done. And then the third thing is to do it without question, right? And keep in mind, I don't encourage people to not question, but this is in a cooking context, in the context of a kitchen, right? Is to just simply do whatever needs to be done without asking too many questions about it. This makes things flow easier. Even if you don't understand the whole picture, we have to trust that somebody's in charge here and has put some work into the planning. And you might consider this for when you enter into your own kitchen and you see, like, for example, in my case, my partner's cooking and I have no idea what she's cooking. So I'm not going to try to interfere with her and tell her, you should be doing this and you should be doing that. Rather, I'm going to pick up a plate and I'm going to start drying it if it needs dried. Or if I see dishes in the sink, I'm just going to pick them up and start cleaning them. Right? That's what needs. Or if the floor is dirty, I'm going to take a broom and start sweeping the floor. Or I'm going to say, what can I do for you at this time? And I'm not going to be questioning, why are you doing that? It's too late to do that. The questioning has to come before, right? That comes in with the planning aspect. So again, keep this in mind. We're talking about Zen practice. This is how we practice in the midst of people, right? In real life people. This is Zen off of the cushion. It's collaboration, it's consultation, it's looking around to see what needs to be done, right? The role of the assistant in this case, if you're an assistant like I often am, if my partner's cooking in a kitchen, I'm automatically, I assume the role of an assistant to her. And my practice then is, it could be being mindful of my breathing in whatever activity I'm doing. It could be mindful of the way that I'm chopping the food. It could be mindful of bodily sensations. It could be mindful speech, right? The way that I speak and, sharing my deep gratitude for the fact that somebody else is cooking for me. That's practice, right? That's Zen practice. It could be, and especially in a Zen context, it could be mindfulness of the sounds that you're making, especially if other people are doing Zazen in the other room. So we want to move in such a way that we're not creating a lot of sound. So when you're removing pots and pans from the cupboard, you do so in such a way that it greatly reduces or eliminates sound. Right? Okay. So collaboration, consultation, this is the first thing that Dogen talks about. And really, I think the important point is to keep in mind that Zen practice is, you don't have to do this all alone. You don't have to do this all by yourself and figure everything else out. In a Zen temple context, which is a mirror of a kind of family context, there are a lot of people there that are helping you out. And so the ability to receive guidance, this is so important. It's important in the kitchen. It's important outside of the kitchen. All right, the second piece is to plan ahead. So if you have the opportunity to cook, right, plan it out. I'm not so good at this all the time. I sometimes I'm making decisions on the fly what meal I'm going to make. But sometimes I also think ahead a little bit. And I know some people will even plan a whole week's worth of meals out. I don't suggest that's the way we should go, but maybe at least 1 or 2 meals ahead, right? And I talked previously about considerations as to what kinds of foods to use there, but right now, just thinking about planning ahead. And planning ahead is very much an act of hope. And this is so important in the present. We talk a lot about the present moment in Zen practice. And again, especially if you're new to practice, you might think, oh, just get into the present moment and that's it. But the present moment also includes planning for the future. And I see, even in myself, sometimes I can get so mired in present events that are happening around me that it can be even paralyzing to even think about the future. And I'm not alone there. There's a lot of people in our society today, and I see them on behavioral health wards, that are so paralyzed in the present moment. They don't know, they don't even see if they have no future. And so to actively plan for your future, even if it's a day in advance, just one day ahead. That is a profound act of hope in the future. It's an act of faith in the world. It's an act of faith that we are all moving towards Buddhahood, right? That's the goal. If you want to keep in mind that goal of practice is that all of us are moving towards becoming completely, perfectly enlightened beings. I'm not there yet. We're not there yet. We're certainly not there yet as a culture or as a society or as an earth community. But that's the aim and we trust in that, oh, why am I doing this? Complete, perfect enlightenment, right? I want to get there. I want to be a Buddha. At the same time, we're wrestling with, I'm perfectly okay just as I am, right? That was, Katagiri Roshi would say that you're perfect just as you are, and there's plenty of room for improvement, right? So we're in that dynamic tension between just as we are is fine, and don't give up. Don't give up on the future, right? So in the context of cooking, plan, right? There's something wonderful about planning ahead. And Buddha himself in the Dhammapada, he says, what we are today comes from thoughts of yesterday, and our present thoughts build our life of tomorrow. Our life is the creation of our mind. What we are today, what we are right now, comes from our thoughts of yesterday. And by yesterday, you could think of the immediacy of yesterday, but it's not just yesterday, a day ago. It could be a lifetime ago. What we are today is the result of the past, right? And our future is built on our thoughts of right now. So it's very important to keep in mind the importance of planning as well. And we want to mindfully plan. So I want to close with a story of this is outside of the Buddhist tradition, a story of Sufi Bayazid Bastami, and he died in the year 875. So this was about 1,200 years ago or so. It's a story about collaboration with the earth. It's a story about respecting other kinds as well as receiving feedback. So the Sufi Bayazid, he purchased cardamom seeds in a town that was 450 miles away from where he lived. He purchased cardamom seeds. And for those of you who know about cardamom, they're ingredients that are often used in Indian cooking and Middle Eastern cooking. He discovered when he returned that there were ants in the cardamom. It somehow got mixed in with the cardamom seeds. And so he returned 450 miles to bring the ants back to where they belonged. That's the story. And, this is 870. Well, if he died in 875, you can imagine he wasn't getting in a car to return those ants. He was probably going on foot 450 miles, right? So this story, I just find this fascinating. This story echoes the story of the Tenzo that we heard about earlier in China, who walked some over 20 miles just to get shiitake mushrooms. And it also made me think, if I had ants in my kitchen, most of us would probably take out a bottle of Raid, right? Take out the Raid and get rid of the ants, then it's done, right? So, but even if this seems outrageous to return the ants to their place, it's sending a message about the importance that this Sufi master recognized in the balance of the earth community, and that everything, even ants, have their rightful place. That, and so for us, maybe it means if we have bugs on our food, we just simply take them outside, right? We have some choices. And this is a story that's meant to inspire us. Now, last week, you had a person, I mean, if you think it's crazy to walk 450 miles just to take ants back to their rightful place, last week you had Esther Myobun Tishman, right, from Liberty Walks, who's walking from Oregon, from Eugene, Oregon, all the way to Washington, D.C. She's in the middle of that right now. What an amazing and inspiring story that somebody would have the courage to do that at her age yet, right? I didn't have the privilege to meet her, unfortunately, but I know the good people at Buddha Eye Temple, Zen Temple, Buddha Eye Zen Temple in Eugene, Oregon, and I was there a couple of years ago. I didn't get to meet Myobun then, at least that I'm aware of, because there was a big ceremony there. But the fact that she's taking all that, to walk, and what is she walking for? She herself is walking, and I got to see a really nice photo on a bridge with some members of the Zen Center, including George, with Myobun and other people in Omaha. And I was just like, wow, that's so amazing, right? And what is she walking for? She's walking to end the divisiveness that's present in our society. Again, another way to bring balance back to our society. So, these ideas of balance, collaboration, compromise, these are so important, and we can learn these. You don't have to walk 450 miles. You don't have to walk across the country. Simply learn how to collaborate with the people that are in your very kitchen, the people that are in your very workplace that you don't like, that you don't agree with. You don't have to agree with them to collaborate with them. And when we get down to the bottom of it, we can find common ground, right? So don't wait for things to be perfect. Don't wait for people to be perfect. Learn how to see yourself in others. That's the point here. Thank you very much.